The sun was just beginning to set as I pulled into the driveway of our modest suburban home. The house, with its white picket fence and well-manicured lawn, was a picture of the American dream. I had always taken pride in providing a stable and comfortable life for my family. My wife Emily and I had been together for 15 years, and we had two beautiful children, Lily and Max. As I stepped out of the car, the familiar scent of freshly cut grass filled the air. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the stress of the day. Working as a software engineer at a tech startup was demanding, but it was a job I loved. It allowed me to provide for my family and gave me a sense of purpose. Emily was already home, her car parked in the garage. I could see the lights on in the kitchen, and the sound of laughter drifted through the open window. It was a comforting sight, one that I had grown accustomed to over the years. But lately, something felt off. It started with small things. A text message that Emily quickly hid when I walked into the room, late-night phone calls that she would take in the other room, and unexplained absences. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. Emily had always been a private person, and I trusted her implicitly. But as the days turned into weeks, the suspicions grew stronger. I walked into the house, the smell of dinner wafting through the air. Emily was in the kitchen, her back to me as she stirred something on the stove. She turned around as I entered, a smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey, you're home," she said, her voice cheerful but strained. "Yeah, traffic was lighter than usual," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. I leaned in to kiss her cheek, but she turned away slightly, making it an awkward half-hug instead. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes," she said, turning back to the stove. I nodded and made my way upstairs to change out of my work clothes. As I passed Lily's room, I heard her giggling with Max. I peeked in to see them playing a board game, their faces lit up with joy. It was a sight that usually filled me with warmth, but today, it was tinged with a sense of unease. In our bedroom, I changed into a comfortable pair of jeans and a t-shirt. As I was about to head back downstairs, my eye caught a glimpse of Emily's phone on the nightstand. It was face down, the screen dark. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. I knew it was wrong, but the urge to know the truth was overwhelming. Quickly entered her passcode, a combination of our anniversary date and Lily's birthday. The screen lit up, revealing a series of notifications. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through her messages. Most were innocuous, reminders from the kids' school, a few texts from her friends. But then I saw it. A message from a number I didn't recognize. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Miss you." My stomach churned as I read the words. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, but mostly I felt betrayed. I quickly put the phone back on the nightstand, my mind racing. I needed to confront her, but I also needed more evidence. I couldn't accuse her based on a single message. Dinner was a blur. I tried to act normal, but my mind was elsewhere. Emily seemed oblivious to my turmoil, chatting with the kids about their day at school. I forced myself to eat, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. After dinner, I helped clear the table and load the dishwasher. Emily went upstairs to help the kids with their homework, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I needed a plan. I decided to start by gathering more evidence. I would check her phone again when she wasn't looking, and maybe even follow her the next time she went out. It felt wrong, but I needed to know the truth. As the night wore on, I found myself lying in bed next to Emily, staring at the ceiling. She was already asleep, her breathing steady and calm. I felt a pang of longing for the way things used to be, before the suspicions and the doubt. But I knew I couldn't go back. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and suspicion. Every time Emily's phone buzzed, my heart would leap into my throat. I found myself constantly on edge, waiting for the next piece of evidence to confirm my worst fears. I started by checking her phone whenever I had the chance. I would wait until she was in the shower or out running errands, then quickly scroll through her messages and emails. Each time I felt a sickening mix of guilt and desperation. I knew I was invading her privacy, but I needed to know the truth. One evening, while Emily was out with her friends, I decided to take a closer look at her laptop. She had left it on the kitchen table, and I knew her password. It was the same, one she used for everything. I opened it up and started going through her emails. Most were work-related, but then I found a folder labeled Personal. My heart pounded as I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of emails from the same unknown number I had seen on her phone. I opened the most recent one, my hands shaking. It was a love letter, filled with words of affection and longing. My stomach churned as I read it, the reality of her betrayal hitting me like a punch to the gut. I scrolled through the other emails, each one more damning than the last. There were plans to meet up, declarations of love, and even a few explicit photos. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized the extent of her affair, but I needed more than just emails. I needed concrete evidence, something that would leave no room for doubt. I decided to follow her the next time she went out. The opportunity came a few days later. Emily told me she was going to meet a friend for coffee, but I knew better. I waited until she left, then grabbed my car keys and followed her at a safe distance. She drove to a nearby park, one we had visited many times as a family. I parked a few spaces away and watched as she got out of her car and walked towards a bench by the lake. A man was already sitting there, his back to me. As Emily approached, he stood up and embraced her. They kissed, and I felt a surge of anger and pain. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands shaking with emotion. I watched them for a few more minutes, their laughter and easy conversation a stark contrast to the turmoil I was feeling. Then I drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of confrontation and revenge. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Emily, my mind replaying the scene from the park over and over again. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, not just from Emily, but from the life we had built together. I had always thought we were happy, that we had a strong and loving marriage, but now I realized it was all a lie. The next morning, I decided it was time to confront her. I waited until the kids were at school and we were alone in the house. Emily was in the kitchen making breakfast when I walked in. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She turned to look at me, her eyes widening in surprise. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "About this," I said, holding up my phone with the photos from the park. Her face paled as she looked at the screen. "I can explain," she stammered, but I cut her off. "There's nothing to explain, Emily. I've seen the emails, the texts, the photos. I know everything." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I never meant for this to happen." "How long has it been going on?" I asked, my voice cold. "A few months," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I met him at work, and we just connected." I felt a surge of anger. "Connected? You mean you fell in love with him?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she repeated. "I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her, the woman I had loved and trusted for so many years, and felt a deep sense of sadness. "It's too late for that," I said, turning away. The confrontation left me feeling drained and empty. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to process the reality of my situation. I knew I had to make a decision to figure out what to do next. But for now, all I could do was feel the pain of her betrayal. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew thicker. Emily and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was in clipped, polite tones. The kids noticed the change, their faces filled with confusion and worry. I tried to reassure them, to tell them that everything would be okay, but I knew it was a lie. Family dinners became a thing of the past, replaced by silent meals and awkward silences. I found myself spending more time at work, using it as an escape from the reality of my crumbling marriage. But even there, I couldn't find peace. The betrayal gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the pain I was feeling. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I made a decision. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just accept the betrayal and move on. I needed to do something. To take control of the situation and make things right, I started by making a list of everything I knew about Emily's affair. I wrote down the names, the dates, the places they had met. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, the emails, the texts, the photos, and organized them into a folder. Then I started to plan. I knew I needed to be careful, to make sure that my actions wouldn't backfire. I needed to think strategically, to consider every possible outcome. But most of all, I needed to make sure that Emily would feel the same pain and betrayal that I was feeling. As I sat there plotting my revenge, I felt a sense of determination wash over me. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be obstacles and challenges along the way. But I was ready. I was ready to take control of my life and make things right. The days that followed the confrontation were filled with a mix of anger, sadness, and a burning desire for justice. I couldn't just let Emily's betrayal go unpunished. I needed to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. But I knew I had to be smart about it. Revenge wasn't something to be taken lightly. It required careful planning and execution. I started by creating a detailed plan. I wrote down every step, every possible scenario, and every potential obstacle. I knew I had to be meticulous, leaving nothing to chance. The first step was to gather more information about the man Emily was having an affair with. I needed to know his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities, and how I could use them to my advantage. I began by digging into his background. His name was Michael, and he worked at the same company as Emily. He was a mid-level manager, divorced, with no kids. I found his social media profiles and scrolled through his posts, looking for any information that could be useful. I discovered that he was active in local charity events and had a reputation for being a bit of a playboy. This information would be crucial in my plan. Next, I needed to find a way to expose their affair publicly. I wanted everyone to know what Emily had done, to see the pain she had caused. I decided to start by anonymously sending the photos and emails to Michael's boss. I knew that if his superiors found out about the affair, it would cause a scandal at work, potentially costing him his job. I created a fake email account and drafted a message, attaching the incriminating evidence. I made sure to include a note about how Michael's behavior was unprofessional and unethical, hoping it would spark an internal investigation. I hit send and felt a small sense of satisfaction, knowing that the first domino had fallen. But exposing the affair at work wasn't enough. I needed to make sure Emily felt the full weight of her actions. I decided to involve her family and friends, the people she cared about most. I knew it would be painful for her, but I couldn't help feeling a sense of justice in my actions. I started by reaching out to her best friend, Sarah. I sent her an anonymous message with the photos and emails, explaining that Emily had been cheating on me. I knew Sarah would be shocked and hurt, but I also knew she would confront Emily about it. I wanted Emily to feel the same sense of betrayal and loss that I had felt. As I waited for the fallout from my actions, I continued to plan. I knew I needed to be prepared for any possible outcome. I considered the legal implications, the potential backlash from Emily's family, and the impact on our children. I wanted to make sure that my actions wouldn't cause more harm than good. One evening, as I sat alone in my home office, I received a call from Sarah. She was crying, her voice filled with anger and disbelief. She told me that she had confronted Emily about the affair and that Emily had admitted everything. Sarah was furious, feeling betrayed by her best friend. I listened to her, offering words of comfort and support, but inside, I felt a sense of vindication. The next day, I received a call from Michael's boss. He told me that an internal investigation had been launched and that Michael had been suspended pending the outcome. I thanked him for the update and hung up, feeling a mix of satisfaction and guilt. I knew my actions were causing pain, but I also knew that they were necessary. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house grew thicker. Emily and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was in clipped, polite tones. The kids noticed the change, their faces filled with confusion and worry. I tried to reassure them, to tell them that everything would be okay, but I knew it was a lie. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Emily and Michael taken at a local restaurant. They were laughing and holding hands, oblivious to the world around them. I felt a surge of anger and pain, realizing that despite everything, they were still together. I knew I had to escalate my plan. I decided to confront Michael directly, to make him understand the pain he had caused. I waited until I knew he would be alone and drove to his apartment. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Michael answered, his face a mix of surprise and fear. I pushed past him and entered the apartment, my eyes scanning the room. It was neat and tidy, with no sign of Emily. I turned to face him, my voice cold and steady. "You need to end it," I said, my eyes locked on his. "You need to end it now." Michael looked at me, his face pale. "I can't," he stammered. "I love her." I felt a surge of anger. "Love her? You don't know the meaning of the word. You've destroyed my family, my life. And for what? A cheap thrill?" Michael looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I never meant for this to happen." I looked at him, the man who had caused so much pain, and felt a deep sense of sadness. "It's too late for that," I said, turning away. "End it, or I'll make sure you regret it." As I left the apartment, I felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt. I knew my actions were causing pain, but I also knew that they were necessary. I had to make sure that Emily and Michael understood the consequences of their actions, that they felt the same pain they had inflicted on me. Over the next few days, I continued to monitor the situation. I received updates from Sarah and Michael's boss, both confirming that the affair had been exposed and that there were serious consequences. I knew my plan was working, but I also knew that it wasn't over yet. I decided to take one final step to make sure that Emily would never forget the pain she had caused. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, the emails, the texts, the photos, and created a detailed report. I included every piece of information, every sordid detail, and sent it to Emily's family and friends. I wanted them to know the truth, to see the pain she had caused. As I hit send, I felt a sense of finality. I knew that my actions would have consequences, that there would be backlash and pain. But I also knew that it was necessary, that I had to make things right. The day had finally come. I had spent weeks meticulously planning every detail, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. Today was the day I would execute my revenge, and I was ready. I woke up early, the house still quiet. Emily was asleep in the guest room, a place she had been staying since our confrontation. I took a quick shower, the hot water washing away, the remnants of sleep, but not the tension that had been building inside me. I dressed in a suit, wanting to look my best for what was to come. My first stop was Michael's workplace. I had timed my arrival to coincide with the morning rush, ensuring that as many people as possible would witness what was about to happen. I parked my car in the visitor's lot and walked towards the entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. As I entered the lobby, I saw Michael standing by the elevator talking to a colleague. He looked up as I approached, his face paling in recognition. I walked straight up to him, ignoring the curious glances from the people around us. "Michael," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I think it's time we had a talk." He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. "Not here," he stammered, glancing around nervously. "Oh, I think here is perfect," I replied, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want everyone to know what kind of man you are." I pulled out a folder from my briefcase, the one containing all the evidence of their affair. I opened it and began to read aloud, my voice echoing through the lobby. People stopped and stared, their eyes widening in shock as they realized what was happening. "Emails, texts, photos," I said, holding up each piece of evidence. "All proof of your affair with my wife. You thought you could get away with it, but you were wrong." Michael looked at me, his face a mix of shock and humiliation. Please stop, he begged, but I ignored him. You destroyed my family, my life, I continued, my voice filled with anger. And now, everyone will know the truth. I turned to the crowd, my eyes scanning the faces of Michael's colleagues. This man is a liar and a cheat, I said, my voice steady. He deserves to be exposed for what he is. As I finished speaking, I saw a security guard approaching. I knew my time was limited, so I quickly handed the folder to the nearest person, a young woman who looked at me with a mix of shock and sympathy. Make sure this gets to the right people, I said, before turning and walking away. As I left the building, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I knew that Michael's career was over, that he would never be able to show his face in that office again. But I also knew that my work was not done. My next stop was Emily's family home. I had always had a good relationship with her parents, and I knew that they would be devastated by the news of her affair. I parked my car in the driveway and walked up to the front door, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to do. Emily's mother answered the door, her face lighting up in surprise. "What a pleasant surprise," she exclaimed, ushering me inside. "Emily didn't tell us you were coming." I followed her into the living room, where Emily's father was sitting in his favorite armchair reading the newspaper. He looked up as I entered, a smile on his face. "I need to talk to you both," I said, my voice serious. "It's about Emily." They looked at me, their faces filled with concern. I took a deep breath and began to explain, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I told them about the affair, about the pain and betrayal I had felt, and about the steps I had taken to expose the truth. Emily's mother looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "How could she do this to you?" Emily's father looked at me, his face a mix of anger and sadness. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "We had no idea." I looked at them, the people who had welcomed me into their family with open arms, and felt a deep sense of sadness. "I know this is hard to hear," I said, my voice gentle, "but I needed you to know the truth." As I left their house, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I knew that my actions had caused them pain, but I also knew that it was necessary. I had to make sure that Emily understood the consequences of her actions, that she felt the same pain she had inflicted on me. My final stop was our family home. I knew that Emily would be there, waiting for me. I parked my car in the driveway and walked up to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I entered the house, I saw Emily standing in the living room, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. "I know what you've done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know you've exposed the affair." I looked at her, the woman I had loved and trusted for so many years, and felt a deep sense of sadness. "I had to," I said, my voice steady. "I had to make you understand the pain you've caused." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with regret. "I never meant for this to happen." I looked at her, the woman who had betrayed me, and felt a mix of anger and sadness. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice cold. "You've destroyed our family, our life, and now you have to live with the consequences." As I turned to leave, I felt a sense of finality. I knew that my actions had caused pain, but I also knew that they were necessary. I had to make things right, to ensure that justice was served. But as I walked out the door, I felt a sudden pang of doubt. Had I gone too far? Had my desire for revenge clouded my judgment? I pushed the thoughts aside, determined to see this through to the end. Over the next few days, the fallout from my actions became clear. Michael was fired from his job, his reputation in tatters. Emily's family was in shock, struggling to come to terms with the truth. And Emily herself was a shell of the woman she once was, her eyes filled with a deep sense of regret and sadness. But as I watched the events unfold, I realized that there was more to the story than I had anticipated. unexpected twists began to emerge, complicating my plan and forcing me to reevaluate my actions. One evening, as I sat alone in my home office, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I said, my voice tentative. "It's Sarah," the voice on the other end said, her tone serious. "We need to talk." I listened as Sarah explained that there was more to the story than I had realized. She told me that Emily had been manipulated, that Michael had been using her for his own gain. She revealed that Michael had been involved in a larger conspiracy, one that involved other people in our lives. As I listened to Sarah, I felt a mix of shock and disbelief. I had been so focused on my desire for revenge that I had failed to see the bigger picture. I realized that my actions had caused more harm than good, that I had been blinded by my own pain and anger. I thanked Sarah for the information and hung up, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I knew I had to make things right, to find a way to redeem myself and make amends for the pain I had caused. But as I sat there, contemplating my next move, I realized that the path to redemption would not be easy. I had to face the consequences of my actions to make things right, not just for myself, but for everyone involved. The days that followed were a blur of chaos and emotional turmoil. The exposure of Emily's affair had sent shockwaves through our family and social circle, and the repercussions were far-reaching. I found myself grappling with the aftermath, trying to make sense of the mess I had created. The first thing I noticed was the change in our neighborhood. People who had once greeted me with smiles and waves now averted their eyes or whispered behind my back. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent condemnation of my actions. It was a harsh reminder that my quest for revenge had not gone unnoticed. At work, things were no better. My colleagues, who had always respected me for my professionalism and dedication, now looked at me with a mix of pity and disdain. Rumors had spread like wildfire, and I was the subject of hushed conversations and speculative glances. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the constant scrutiny made it difficult to concentrate. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He was a stern man, known for his no-nonsense approach, and I braced myself for the worst. As I sat down, he looked at me with a serious expression. "I'm sure you're aware of the situation," he began, his voice measured. "Your personal life has become a topic of discussion here, and it's affecting the workplace environment." I nodded, feeling a sense of dread. "I understand," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We value your contributions to the company," he continued, "but we can't ignore the impact this is having on morale. I'm going to have to ask you to take some time off, to let things settle down." I felt a pang of disappointment, but I knew he was right. My actions had consequences, and I had to face them. I agreed to take a leave of absence, hoping that the time away would give me a chance to reflect and regroup. At home, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Emily and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was in clipped, polite tones. The kids were affected the most, their faces filled with confusion and worry. I tried to reassure them, to tell them that everything would be okay, but I knew it was a lie. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I heard soft footsteps approaching. I looked up to see Lily, her eyes filled with tears. She climbed onto the couch next to me, her small hand reaching for mine. "Daddy, why are you and Mommy fighting?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, my heart aching with love and sadness. "Sometimes, grown-ups have problems that are hard to understand," I said, my voice gentle. "But we're trying to work things out." She looked at me, her eyes filled with worry. "Are you going to get a divorce?" she asked, her voice trembling. I felt a pang of guilt. I had been so focused on my own pain and anger that I had forgotten about the impact on our children. I pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "We're going to do everything we can to make things better," I said, my voice filled with determination. "I promise." As I held her, I realized that I had to make things right, not just for myself, but for my family. I had to find a way to reconcile with Emily, to move past the pain and betrayal, and to rebuild our lives. The next day, I decided to reach out to Emily. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be anger and resentment on both sides, but I also knew that it was necessary. I sent her a text asking if we could talk. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, a place we had often visited in happier times. As I walked in, I saw her sitting at a table by the window, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and regret. I took a deep breath and approached her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice tentative. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think you'd want to talk to me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I sat down across from her, my mind racing with thoughts of what to say. "I know things have been difficult," I began, my voice steady. "But I think it's time we tried to work things out." She looked at me, her eyes filled with surprise. "You want to work things out?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. I nodded, my voice filled with determination. "I want to try. For the kids and for us." We spent the next hour talking, our conversation filled with tears and apologies. Emily admitted that she had been wrong, that she had let her emotions cloud her judgment. She told me about the manipulation, about how Michael had used her for his own gain. I listened, my heart aching with sadness and regret. As we talked, I realized that my desire for revenge had blinded me to the truth. I had been so focused on my own pain and anger that I had failed to see the bigger picture. I had caused more harm than good, and I had to make things right. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I worked on rebuilding our relationship. We went to couples therapy, seeking guidance and support as we navigated the complex emotions of betrayal and forgiveness. It was a difficult process, filled with tears and arguments, but we were determined to make it work. At the same time, I reached out to Michael. I knew that my actions had caused him pain, and I wanted to make amends. I met him at a neutral location, a park where we could talk in private. As I approached him, I saw the fear and resentment in his eyes. "I know you're angry," I said, my voice steady, "and you have every right to be. But I want to apologize for my actions. I let my desire for revenge cloud my judgment, and I caused more harm than good." Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with surprise. "You're apologizing?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I nodded, my voice filled with regret. "I was wrong. I should have handled things differently, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused." We talked for a while, our conversation filled with tension and emotion. Michael admitted that he had been wrong, that he had used Emily for his own gain. He told me about the manipulation, about how he had played on her emotions to get what he wanted. I listened, my heart aching with sadness and regret. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of closure. I knew that my actions had consequences, and I had to face them. But I also knew that I had taken the first step towards redemption, towards making things right. Over the next few months, Emily and I continued to work on our relationship. We went on family outings, reconnecting with our children and rebuilding the trust that had been broken. It was a slow process, filled with ups and downs, but we were determined to make it work. At the same time, I reached out to Emily's family and friends, seeking their forgiveness and support. I knew that my actions had caused them pain, and I wanted to make amends. I apologized for my behavior, explaining that I had been blinded by my desire for revenge. They listened, their faces filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to see a change in our family. The tension and anger that had once filled our home were replaced by laughter and love. The kids were happier, their faces filled with joy and excitement. And Emily and I were stronger, our bond deeper and more resilient than ever before. But as we moved forward, I knew that there was still one more challenge to face. The revelations about Michael's manipulation had opened up a new can of worms, and I had to confront the masterminds behind the conspiracy. I had to make sure that justice was served, that the truth was exposed, and that our family could finally find peace. Just as things seemed to be settling down, a new storm was brewing on the horizon. Emily and I had made significant progress in rebuilding our relationship, and our family was slowly healing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. The revelations about Michael's manipulation had left me with a lingering sense of unease, a nagging suspicion that there was more to the story. One evening, as I sat in my home office, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "You need to know the truth." Intrigued, I opened it and began to read. The email was from an anonymous sender, and it contained a series of attachments, documents, photos, and even audio recordings. As I scrolled through the contents, my heart began to race. The first document was a detailed report outlining a complex conspiracy involving Michael and several other individuals. It revealed that Michael had been using Emily as a pawn in a larger scheme to gain control of a lucrative business deal. The report included names, dates, and specific details about the plot, painting a picture of deceit and manipulation that went far beyond a simple affair. I felt a mix of shock and anger as I realized the extent of the betrayal. Michael had not only manipulated Emily, but had also involved other people in our lives, people we trusted. I scrolled through the photos, recognizing faces of colleagues, friends, and even some of Emily's family members. The web of deceit was far-reaching, and it left me feeling sick to my stomach. The audio recordings were even more damning. They captured conversations between Michael and his accomplices, discussing their plans in detail. I listened as they talked about using Emily to gain access to sensitive information, about manipulating her emotions to serve their purposes. It was a chilling reminder of the depth of their betrayal. As I sat there, absorbing the shocking revelations, I realized that I had to take action. I couldn't let this conspiracy go unpunished. I had to expose the truth and make sure that justice was served. But I also knew that I had to be careful, that I had to plan my next moves strategically. I decided to start by gathering more evidence. I knew that the email was just the tip of the iceberg, and I needed to dig deeper to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy. I began by reaching out to the anonymous sender, thanking them for the information and asking for more details. To my surprise, they responded almost immediately, providing me with additional documents and contacts who could corroborate the story. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly to gather as much evidence as possible. I contacted the people mentioned in the documents, asking them to confirm the details of the conspiracy. Some were reluctant to talk, fearing the repercussions, but others were eager to share their stories, relieved to finally have the truth exposed. As I pieced together the puzzle, I realized that the conspiracy went even deeper than I had imagined. It involved not just Michael and his accomplices, but also high-ranking officials in the company where Emily and Michael worked. They had been using their positions to manipulate deals, gain control of valuable assets, and line their own pockets. The scale of the corruption was staggering, and it left me feeling both angry and determined. One evening, as I sat in the living room with Emily, I decided it was time to share what I had discovered. I knew it would be difficult for her to hear, but I also knew that she deserved to know the truth. I took a deep breath and began to explain, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice tentative. "I've uncovered some information about Michael and the people he was working with. It's worse than we thought." She looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I handed her the folder containing the documents and photos, explaining the details of the conspiracy. She listened in shock, her eyes widening as she realized the extent of the betrayal. Tears streamed down her face as she read through the evidence, the reality of the situation hitting her hard. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "How could they do this to us?" I looked at her, my heart aching with sadness and anger. "They used you, Emily. They manipulated you for their own gain, and now we have to make sure they pay for what they've done." She nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice steady. I explained my plan: to expose the conspiracy, to gather as much evidence as possible, and present it to the authorities. I knew it would be a difficult and dangerous process, but I also knew that it was necessary. We had to make sure that justice was served, that the people responsible for the betrayal were held accountable. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I worked together to gather more evidence. We contacted lawyers, investigators, and even some of
other people.
It was a challenging process, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but we were determined to see it through. As we delved deeper into the conspiracy, we began to uncover even more shocking revelations. We discovered that some of the people we had trusted the most were involved, that they had been working behind the scenes to manipulate and deceive us. It was a painful realization, but it also strengthened our resolve to expose the truth. One evening, as we sat in the living room going through the evidence, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I said, my voice tentative. "It's Sarah," the voice on the other end said, her tone serious. "I have some information that you need to hear." I listened as Sarah explained that she had uncovered even more details about the conspiracy. She told me that Michael and his accomplices had been planning to frame Emily for their crimes, to make her take the fall for their illegal activities. It was a chilling revelation, and it left me feeling both angry and determined. I thanked Sarah for the information and hung up, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I knew we had to act quickly to expose the conspiracy before they could carry out their plan. I turned to Emily, my eyes filled with determination. "We have to move fast," I said, my voice steady. "They're planning to frame you for their crimes. We need to expose the truth before it's too late." She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear and resolve. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I explained my plan to contact the authorities, to present them with the evidence we had gathered, and to request their help in exposing the conspiracy. I knew it would be a risky move, but I also knew that it was necessary. We had to make sure that justice was served, that the people responsible for the betrayal were held accountable. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly to prepare our case. We organized the evidence, created detailed reports, and contacted the authorities, explaining the situation and requesting their help. It was a challenging process, filled with uncertainty and fear, but we were determined to see it through. Finally, the day came when we were ready to present our case. We met with the authorities in a secure location, handing over the evidence and explaining the details of the conspiracy. They listened intently, their faces filled with shock and disbelief as they realized the extent of the corruption. As we left the meeting, I felt a sense of relief and determination. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But I also knew that we were on the right path, that we were doing everything in our power to expose the truth and make sure that justice was served. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Emily and I worked closely with the authorities, providing them with all the evidence we had gathered and helping them build a case against Michael and his accomplices. The scale of the conspiracy was staggering, and it required meticulous planning and coordination to ensure that justice was served. As the investigation progressed, we began to see the impact of our actions. Michael and several of his accomplices were arrested, their crimes exposed to the public. The news spread like wildfire, and the scandal rocked the company and the community. People were shocked and outraged, and the repercussions were far-reaching. One evening, as I sat in the living room with Emily, we received a call from the lead investigator. He informed us that they had made significant progress in the case and that they were ready to move forward with the prosecution. He thanked us for our cooperation and assured us that justice would be served. I felt a sense of relief and satisfaction as I hung up the phone. I knew that our efforts had not been in vain, that we had made a difference. But I also knew that there was still one more step to take, one final confrontation that had to happen. I decided to confront the masterminds behind the conspiracy, the people who had orchestrated the betrayal and manipulation. I knew it would be dangerous, but I also knew that it was necessary. I had to face them, to make sure that they understood the consequences of their actions, and to seek closure for myself and my family. I arranged a meeting with the key players involved in the conspiracy. I chose a neutral location, a quiet cafe where we could talk in private. As I walked in, I saw them sitting at a table by the window, their faces filled with a mix of fear and defiance. I took a deep breath and approached them, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think it's time we had a talk," I said, my voice steady and cold. They looked at me, their eyes filled with a mix of surprise and resentment. I sat down across from them, my eyes locked on theirs. "You thought you could get away with it," I continued, my voice filled with anger. "You thought you could manipulate and deceive us, use us for your own gain. But you were wrong." They looked at me, their faces pale. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," one of them stammered, trying to defend their actions. I looked at them, my eyes filled with contempt. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice cold. "You've caused too much pain, too much suffering, and now you have to face the consequences." I explained the details of the investigation, the evidence we had gathered, and the charges they would be facing. They listened in shock, their faces filled with fear and regret. I knew that my words were hitting them hard, that they were finally realizing the extent of their actions. As I finished speaking, I felt a sense of closure. I knew that I had done everything in my power to expose the truth and to seek justice. But I also knew that there was more to it than just revenge, that I had to find a way to move forward, to heal, and to rebuild my life. Over the next few weeks, the legal process unfolded. Michael and his accomplices were charged with a variety of crimes, including fraud, conspiracy, and manipulation. The trials were long and grueling, but in the end, justice was served. They were sentenced to significant prison terms, their crimes exposed to the public. As the dust settled, Emily and I began to focus on rebuilding our lives. We continued to go to couples therapy, working on our relationship and strengthening our bond. It was a slow process, filled with ups and downs, but we were determined to make it work. At the same time, we focused on our family. We spent more time with the kids, going on family outings and creating lasting memories. We wanted to make sure that they felt loved and secure, that they knew that we were there for them no matter what. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I looked at Emily and the kids, their faces filled with laughter and joy. I felt a deep sense of gratitude and love. I knew that we had been through a lot, that we had faced challenges and obstacles that had tested our strength and resilience, but we had come out stronger, our bond deeper and more meaningful than ever before. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to see a change in our family. The tension and anger that had once filled our home were replaced by laughter and love. The kids were happier, their faces filled with joy and excitement. And Emily and I were stronger, our bond deeper and more resilient than ever before. But as we moved forward, I knew that there was still one more thing I had to do, one final step towards redemption. I had to make amends with the people I had hurt, to seek their forgiveness and to move forward with a clean slate. I decided to reach out to Michael's family, to apologize for the pain I had caused them. I knew that my actions had consequences, and I wanted to make things right. I met with them in a neutral location, a quiet park where we could talk in private. As I approached them, I saw the pain and resentment in their eyes. "I know you're angry," I said, my voice steady, "and you have every right to be. But I want to apologize for my actions. I let my desire for revenge cloud my judgment, and I caused more harm than good." They looked at me, their eyes filled with surprise. "You're apologizing?" one of them asked, their voice filled with disbelief. I nodded, my voice filled with regret. "I was wrong. I should have handled things differently, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused." We talked for a while, our conversation filled with tension and emotion. They admitted that they had been hurt, that they had felt betrayed by my actions. But they also understood the pain and anger that had driven me, the desire for justice that had clouded my judgment. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of closure. I knew that my actions had consequences, and I had to face them. But I also knew that I had taken the first step towards redemption, towards making things right. Over the next few months, Emily and I continued to work on our relationship. We went on family vacations, reconnecting with our children, and rebuilding the trust that had been broken. It was a slow process, filled with ups and downs, but we were determined to make it work. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to see a change in our family. The tension and anger that had once filled our home were replaced by laughter and love. The kids were happier, their faces filled with joy and excitement. And Emily and I were stronger, our bond deeper and more resilient than ever before. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I looked at Emily and the kids, their faces filled with laughter and joy. I felt a deep sense of gratitude and love. I knew that we had been through a lot, that we had faced challenges and obstacles that had tested our strength and resilience, but we had come out stronger, our bond deeper and more meaningful than ever before. As I looked at them, I realized that the journey we had been through had taught me valuable lessons about love, trust, and forgiveness. I had learned the importance of communication, the power of redemption, and the strength of family. And I knew that no matter what challenges we faced in the future, we would face them together, stronger and more resilient than ever before.